And they've turned Calais into a lawless jungle, and it is time to wage war on this phenomenon. That's the views of France's National Front leader, in fact, Marine Le Pen, as she called for internal border controls to help resolve the situation in the northern French town. Her comments came after the riot police again used tear gas to ward off hundreds of people as they try to jump onto lorries bound for the UK. We've been discussing that over the last hour, well, the last half an hour, in fact, with our guests here. We're also going to talk in this half hour about the UK's decision not to help any more efforts to save the lives of people as they try to cross the Mediterranean in search of better life. So our guests are Angela Taccia, who's a research at the Centre for European Studies at Sciences Po University. Thanks very much for being with us. Also Matthew Tardis, who's General Secretary of the Migrants' Rights Association France Terre d'Asile. Phillipe de Breu joins us from Florence, from the Migration Policy Centre, the Jean Monnet Chair for European Law on Immigration and Asylum, and also Philippe de Breu from the Centre for International Research in the Humanities and Social Sciences. He's joining us from New York University. Let's go back to you, Philippe de Breu, joining us from Florence. The situation now that we're going to turn the debate towards slightly is that the UK has decided that it's going to no longer support the efforts that, of course, saved the lives of thousands of people over the last year, those people trying to desperately cross the Mediterranean in search of a better life. It's that phrase that we always hear, of course, over here in Europe. What effect do you think that will have? Because the efforts that Italy has been making, helped, of course, by the international community to help those people, appear to be coming to an end as we speak, really.
Well, we have to really congratulate Italy for the fact that it has decided to save the life of thousands of persons, because it's not only a moral duty, but it's also a legal obligation. And the position of the United Kingdom is, of course, extremely shocking from that point of view, not moral, not legal, and I would also say, but this is maybe not a big surprise, not European. Who can imagine to leave Italy alone in front of this flow through the Mediterranean Sea? Here again, it's a difficult problem to manage, but we will only we will only succeed to a certain extent to manage it if we do this collectively at the EU level.
And it needs to be done at that level, do you think, to try and get not only the funding but the coordination needed, presumably?
Of course, and we have for that an agency which is called Frontex, and that could certainly do much more if it was helped by the member states, because the member states do not put at the disposal of Frontex the necessary means. On the other side, there are also criticism about what Frontex is sometimes doing, that it doesn't respect fully human rights and rights of asylum seekers. This should also be clarified in order to underline clearly in EU law that Frontex has, in case when it happens, search and rescue duty. So this is the only way we can imagine to do something.
And Jean-Philippe Den joining us from the US. I mean, do you think there could be a legal problem here if other countries as well start to follow the UK's lead here?
Well, I think the UK lead is really strange, and I just would like to make a comparison with the Italian case. As you know, Italy has designed an operation called Mare Nostrum in order to help and to rescue people who were trying to reach European coasts, and Italy has on several occasions called the EU to ask for help and for burden sharing in terms of financial budget. And so I think that there are some complementarity. There is a kind of implementation, hopefully, to follow up. And it was also the case for Nathalie Bouchard. She called the British to take more responsibility. And I think a task force should be coordinated at the EU level, so that there will be a coordinated response. And obviously, I do not personally share the position of Great Britain.
I mean, Italy as well, although as you say, it's right potentially to praise them for what's happened over the last year, but Italy has said that this is now unsustainable and they can't just carry on with this programme forever. And it does appear that it is probably going to come to an end now because of the lack of coordination or the lack of funding
exactly,
available.
Yes.
And how
exactly.
What effect will that have then? I mean, presumably that will just mean that people will continue to try to cross, at least in the short term, and will perish.
Yes, I think there is one thing that we should underline is that the lack of preparedness, the lack of cooperation between European countries contribute fueling anti-immigrant resentment and contribute also indirectly to a rise in popular support for far-right or ultra-right parties. And we should, for example, bear in mind that there have been several attacks led by far-right groups against not only migrants, but also against, for example, centers run by a charity association called Secours Catholique. Migrants are sometimes threatened or attacked by cocktail Molotovs. Last June, two undocumented or asylum seekers, one from Eritrea, the other one from Sudan, were shot in June, and the person, the attacker, was sentenced to jail. There has been, of course, a large demonstration in last September with far-right groups in Calais calling for the deportation of asylum seekers. And of course, the last example of how far-right and ultra-right political groups are taking advantage of the current situation and mismanagement of migration is a visit last week of Marine Le Pen in Calais. So the EU leaders should absolutely be aware that if there is no real coordination at the European level, and if there is not a coordination or implementation of a common plan, we may simply, the EU may simply contribute increasing popular support for far and ultra-right political groups, especially in times of economic crisis.
Okay, and what about you, Matthias? I mean, do you think this could lead to a rise of the far right, not just here in France, but in other countries as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's happening already. I mean, going back to the situation of Calais, as it was just mentioned, I mean, the lack of sensible answer to the situation of the migrants. I mean, understand there's no black and white answer to that. But what happened so far, it's just a security responses that leads to the lack of credibility of a political measure, and doesn't solve it at any aspect of a problem. And when you go at the European level, I think there's a lack of coordination, of course, but there's a lack of courage to address properly this situation. And you mentioned earlier that we have a high number of refugees in the world. There are a lot of crises in the world, including in Syria with 3 million refugees fleeing the Syrian conflicts, and it's just at the gate of Europe. And what are we doing? We're building fences at the Greek-Turkish border, at the Bulgarian-Turkish border. This is what we apply to these people, and It might be changing a little bit. I mean, with the end of the Mare Nostrum operation, the Frontex operation is going to take over, but the scope of the operation is more limited than the Italian operation, and they are very concerned about what's going to happen to people who are going to have to be rescued at international seas, and the Frontex operation is not allowed to intervene in international seas, and we get to hear that we get to see that there are new positions and things are changing. I think the UK is drifting away from Europe, and that's a European issue. That's not a migration issue. It's an issue of what we want to do as a European Union. But when it comes to what we can address as a migration policies, we need to go a bit further. I mean, there are European standards when it comes to treatment of asylum seekers, to asylum application. Every member should be responsible of applying, comply with this European standard. This is not the case in France, for instance, and this is why we have this issue in Calais, but not only in Calais. I mean, the situation is very difficult in other parts of the country, like in Paris. So member states should be responsible for that, but at the same time, we really need to have this European solidarity in fact. I mean, and to go forward for that. I mean, and this is where the European countries think it's difficult to go forward with that, and we have to.
OK, well, we'll continue to discuss this in just a moment. First of all, though, let's just have a report on what the situation has been off the Italian shores.
It's a good day for Captain Giuseppe Maggio and his team. They've rescued 260 migrants from a leaky boat in danger of sinking off the Sicilian coast, many women and children. But the captain of the Fiorio isn't always able to get to boats in distress in time. He often finds himself salvaging bodies.
I've got 2 little girls, and sometimes it's difficult to reconcile the human side with what you have to do, but it does happen. We do everything we can to prevent anyone from drowning, but the flow of migrants is so great that shipwrecks happen.
As they arrive on shore, the migrants are given medical care, photographed and transferred to emergency detention centres. But after more than 150,000 arrivals this year, Italy's capacity to house and feed them is overwhelmed. Rescue operation Mare Nostrum is costing the country €9 million a month. Created a year ago in response to the drowning of 500 migrants off Lampedusa, it's now being wound up. It's meant to be replaced by an EU-funded operation to share the burden more fairly, but so far other European countries have pledged just a third of what Italy is spending. Some, including Britain, have said they want the operation cut because they believe it encourages migrants.
We, as Coast Guards, rescued people before Mare Nostrum, and we will continue. We hope this will be coordinated at a European level. That's what everyone wants.
The new EU mission, Triton, starts on November 1st, but given its reduced scale, Italy may be forced to keep looking for floundering boats or risk hundreds more bodies washing up on its shores.
Well, we've got a graphic to show you now as well. It shows, in fact, where people have come from who've been rescued in the Mediterranean. You can see on the right there, around 32,500 people rescued have come from either Syria or Eritrea. The rest, mostly from Gambia, Mali, Nigeria, Somalia, and also from the Palestinian territories. Good to see that graphic and good to see that report as well, because Angela Taccio, I mean, it really shows, doesn't it? A lot of those people that we saw in that film presumably would not be alive if this operation had not existed for the past year, and therefore similar people to them will not be alive in the future because of it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's a nice image to show, but then maybe we should try to balance it a little bit, because there's another operation going on, or at least the Frontex operation Mosmire, which in fact is just chasing for illegal migrants. And yes, on one side we have this nice image of Italy saving people, but on the other hand, we have it's not a Frontex. Frontex said it's just the Italian presidency who launched it, and in fact, they are just supporting the Italian presidency. It's under the authority of the Italian Interior Minister. So
the UK, though, saying they're not going to support it anymore because it encourages people to make the trip. Is that true?
No, I wouldn't say so, no. And I completely disagree with the UK's attitude. It's not okay to say people stay with you. I have the impression that we're coming again with the same discourse we had in the 80s when we put Schengen in, and we said Europe is rather a fortress. I have the impression that we are exactly in the same situation. Yes, we have a better life here, but stay home, don't come with us.
Let's ask some of our other guests that question. Phillipe de Breu joining us from Florence. The UK saying it's not right to continue the operation because it encourages people to try to make the trip.
Well, I would have a little bit a different opinion from the previous speaker, because it can be the case that to a certain extent there is what people sometimes call an appel d'air, meaning that the fact to save some lives encourages people to put their life at risk. There is maybe a certain risk, but it is of course not a reason for not saving lives. And we have to keep in mind that we have international obligations. There is the Search and Rescue International Convention that we should implement. And this should be shared at EU level.
How would you contradict completely opposing arguments? I mean, one argument that Marine Le Pen often comes up with is that we should simply close all borders.
Well, it depends which borders she's speaking of. If she's speaking about the internal borders, then it means re-establishing internal border controls. Let's be serious, we don't have the means for doing this. And it would just multiply the local problems that we would have at every border. If it is to close the external borders, well, she said we should even send back people to countries that are at war. Well, I'm sorry to say that Marine Le Pen should go back to university. She studied law, but I don't think that she was present the day refugee law was explained.
Because simply it breaks it, you would say?
Of course.
And in which case, I mean, from her point of view, presumably there has to be some kind of alternative, I suppose.
Well, I don't think that she does propose an alternative, alternatives that are absolutely impossible, inhuman, and illegal. So that's her proposal. The real difficulty is that we do not take enough care about those local situations that are then exploited by the extreme right political parties. We should really do as much as we can to avoid that, because this is really feeding a bad debate about immigration.
Jean-Philippe Den joining us from the US. Do you think there's any way around? I mean, is this situation just going to get worse and worse and worse? Because obviously, as transport to a certain extent gets easier, are more and more people going to be forced to leave their homes and therefore try to seek lives in other countries, to try to restart their lives rather than staying in the countries where they've come from in the first place?
Difficult to answer. And could you repeat your question? You're asking if I consider that the situation is going to be worse in the coming decades?
Just because, I mean, obviously, the way modern technology changes more than anything else, it's much easier for people to try to make their way to other countries if they can.
Yes, obviously, but I don't think that the situation will ease in the coming year or in the coming years. Regarding if we consider the situation in Syria or in Iraq, and of course in Africa, I don't think that the situation will ease. And that's the reason why a coordination at the EU level is extremely important, and probably more important than ever, considering the political and social crisis that we are going through. and that, to a certain extent, jeopardize European democracies.
It's difficult for European democracies, isn't it, though? Because, of course, inevitably there's always a limit on the amount of money that they can give. I mean, something that Mathieu Tardis mentioned earlier on was the UN saying today this enormous refugee problem in Syria now, and people are fleeing from Syria with nowhere to go. It's just another refugee problem that is impossible to solve without an enormous amount of money, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. But I think that we should also maybe forget, or at least for a moment, the European situation, and maybe do not forget that most of the refugees are leaving or are fleeing their home countries to neighboring countries. And as you know, most of the Syrian refugees are now in Lebanon or in Turkey or in other countries of the region, and that also the case for most of the African refugees. So Europe is obviously one destination, but that's not the only one. And most of the time, refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants are heading to neighboring countries.
Just in 15 seconds to our two guests, 15 seconds each here in the studio. I mean, do you think there is a way forward, or do you think that this is going to get worse?
I have to be optimistic about the situation and how Europe is going to reply to the situation, and that there's some common sense that will come up of that. I mean, Mare Nostrum did not put people on the road to Europe. I mean, they're playing wars, and I think it's more a choice of society. I mean, whether Europe is want to be within itself and not open to the outside world or not.
Okay, Angela, quickly you.
I'll probably be optimistic too. I think we can have a solidarity, and we can trust each other, even though it's not the case now with the European Union when it comes to immigration. But I think we can, if Italy does something and then France also listens, we can have a common trust and do something about that.
Angela Sacchia, also Mathieu Tardis, Phillipe de Breu and Jean-Philippe de Breu. Thanks very much to our guests for being with us here on The Debate today. Now it's time for today's Media Watch. So Media Watch then. James Creedon is off for the rest of the week, so delighted to have with us Hala Mahirdine instead. Hala, reactions to the Mayor of Calais meeting the UK Commons Select Committee. You found some already, haven't you?
There's been lots of reaction. Of course, the press are already picking up on the sound bites, on the one-liners, like the Calais migrants are willing to die. Also, the fact that the UK is a soft touch. So that's what the mainstream press is looking at. But as I was following the meeting, like the people who were live tweeting it, and they were focusing on the aspects of the meeting that perhaps won't be reported in the press. One of them, of course, was the less obvious point that the Mayor of Calais speaks little English. Of course, the Select Committee don't speak that much French, with the exception of Keith Vaz, who says here was stretching his A-level French by doing the introduction in French. However, that didn't last very long, as when he was interrogating her, he reverted to the traditional British approach, which was speaking very slowly, hopefully in a louder voice. They did have a translator there. I think their abilities were stretched to the limit there. Unfortunately, a lot of people picking up on the sample exchanges. Why are there so many problems? The translator says, "I'm very honoured to be here." So not used to using a translator. It did make for some interesting exchanges. Other journalists were also picking up on the fact that it made fantastic television for those who were able to watch it. This one journalist saying that the Home Affairs Select Committee MPs were being very rude to the mayor. So it was quite a fiery exchange. One person here picking up one of the exchanges. The real magnet is the benefits in Britain. Of course, the response from the committee was, no, it's not. It's the fact we have jobs, a better economy. So some quite, intemperate language.
It's quite feisty, some of it, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, one person saying the hectoring tone in which Michael Eris is interrogating the mayor of Calais, suggests he thinks she's an illegal immigrant herself, which another person responded, you know, who does she think she is, coming over here, taking our select committees and so on. So we're seeing a lot of satirical responses as well. Of course, the Daily Mail reporter saying that the immigrants queuing to Calais aren't wearing their poppies. So although it's a very serious topic, we are seeing some satirical responses coming out.
OK, Hala, thank you very much. That's Hala Mahideen having a little bit of a look at some of the reactions to that Calais story that, of course, we were covering a little bit earlier on the programme. Online, already those reactions coming in. Hala will be back a little bit later on during the day here on France 24. Of course, Tom Burgess-Watson is here with the very latest news. After the break, so do stay with us. Thanks very much for being with us on the earlier part of today's Live from Paris.